Press the phone. Yeah. Okay, I think we will make a start then. Good evening and welcome everybody to this first meeting of the newly reconstituted Housing and Community Safety Scrutiny Commission. My name is Councillor Ellie Cumbo and I am the new chair. I'm also a new councillor, as are many of our sitting commission members. Just to say before we get on to the business, there are no planned fire alarm tests this evening. So if you do hear the fire alarm, please do leave by the nearest fire exit and make your way to the agreed assembly point, which for those who don't know is at St John's Churchyard off Druid Street, and security staff will be available to direct you. The public toilets are located off the main reception area. And as I have just learned, it is necessary please to switch your mobile phone to silent while in the meeting room. Members of the public, not that I can see any yet, are nevertheless welcome to film or audio record or indeed photograph and indeed tweet the public proceedings. But we do ask that you'll consider it to others and don't film or record the audience. There is a copy of the Council's protocol for reporting and filming available on the website. The code for accessing our Wi-Fi is virtually unpronounceable, but I'll give it a go. It's capital F, lowercase r, 33, capital W, lowercase I-F-I. The meeting is being live streamed via the Zoom platform to YouTube, and it will be uploaded to Southwark Council's YouTube channel by tomorrow. Can I remind members, please, to raise your hand if you want to speak, and I will call you before you come in. And lastly, please, can I just say at the outset that we do ask members not to digress onto other issues and to keep comments and questions concise and specific to the agenda item being discussed. Apologies. We have received apologies from Councillor Sam Foster, but as far as I can tell, everyone else was here on the dot of 7 o'clock, which is excellent. So thank you. So I don't need to ask for any further apologies, which means we can move on to the confirmation of voting members. So I'm going to call out all the names of everyone who is a voting member and a non-voting member and ask you to either raise your hand or respond verbally. So I'm Councillor Ellie Cumbo, I'm the chair and I'm present. Councillor Jane Salmon, our vice chair.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, Jane Salmon, Vice Chair, and I am a voting member.
Thank you. Councillor Barry Hargrove.
Voting member, Chair.
Councillor Esme Hicks. Councillor Portia Mwanganje. Councillor Emily Tester. Non-voting members, Bassi Bassi.
Voting member.
And
sorry, non-voting member. I got carried away by the rest. So.
It was a test. I think I failed it. Chris Claridge. Ina Negoita. Okay, thank you very much. And there are no urgent items of business to be added, which means we can move on to the disclosure of interests and dispensations, which is the third item on the agenda. So does any member wish to declare any interests or dispensations in respect of any item of business that's to be considered at this meeting? Excellent. Oh, sorry, yes.
Sorry, Chair. Just so I make it clear, I'm a council leaseholder. That's why I'll be able to speak on certain matters because I've made phone calls and things like that with regard to calling for repairs and things like that.
Oh, right.
I don't think it prejudiced, but I just want to be honest about it.
Thank you. Any further contributions? Councillor?
I'm the same, so just in the interest of transparency.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And any more?
I don't know if I need to disclose, but I'm the chair of Northwest Area Forum and also the chair of Leaseholders Forum. I didn't know that those positions are disclosed because I don't know.
Well, I entirely agree with Councillor Salmon. It's well to be as transparent as possible, but no, I don't think any of these are a problem. Which means, I think, I'm just checking that the tech is with us, that we can, thank you, which means I believe we can move on to our first item of business of the year, which is to discuss safer neighbourhood teams. So could I please invite Chief Inspector Boswell, who's joining us this evening, to come to the table. And we have a PowerPoint presentation, I believe, once we're ready to go. Okay. please. Yeah, please do.
Yes, evening everyone. My name's Steve Boswell. I am the Neighbourhoods Chief Inspector for Southwark and Lambeth. So I cover both. I've recently joined the BCU approximately 4 to 5 months ago. Really happy to be here and already seen how great the partnerships are and our staff and the people we work with and the communities. What I've done, I've kind of put together a very brief PowerPoint presentation to give you an overview of neighbourhood policing, and I've broken it down into 4 different areas. And I've put on there that one of the Met's operational priorities. So if we could go back one of the Met's organisational priorities is obviously to work more closely with partners and the public. And we recognise that we need to work harder to earn the trust of more young people and ethnic minority communities, and can only do this in partnerships with the community and with partners. Thank you. Okay, so the overview of neighbourhood policing in Southwark. As you are all probably aware, Southwark has 23 wards and we have 23 neighbourhood policing teams that work on all of the wards. So each ward has its own neighbourhood policing team. Each ward has a minimum of 2 dedicated police officers and 1 police community officer, or PCSO. However, 7 of the wards in Southwark have recently benefited from an uplift in officers to 4 dedicated police officers, plus the 1 PCSO. That's an increase of 2 per ward on those 7 wards, and these are St Giles, Rye Lane, Old Kent Road, North Walworth, Newington, London Bridge, West Bermondsey and Camberwell Green, which is really positive for us and really helps with our work with the communities and our partnership activities. Additional to these, we have a neighbourhood tasking team. They're a pan-BCU team who support the ward officers with activities and cover, or are there available to cover when the ward officers aren't on duty. So obviously they work a shift pattern. There are days when they're not servicing their ward because they're on rest days or annual leave, and we're able to draw on the tasking team to cover and backfill where needed. We also have a well-established dedicated schools team with named officers for all the secondary schools in Southwark. And this team consists of 21 PCs, a sergeant and an inspector overseeing that. And in addition to that, we also have a partnership and prevention team with a number of dedicated officers involved in youth engagement, hate crime officer, an LGBT plus officer, hospital liaison, licensing team. We work very closely with the council licensing team, vulnerable people and places, a newly formed PEP coordinator, and a faith and community officer as well. I should say officer as opposed to orders, so I apologise about that. The next slide gives you an overview of the structure of neighbourhood policing. The Central South BCU has Mr. Wingrove as the Chief Superintendent. He oversees all the activities and all the officers on the BCU. Specific to neighbourhoods, we have Mr. Ivy, so Superintendent Dan Ivy, who is the Superintendent in charge of neighbourhood policing. And then it breaks down to myself. I have responsibility for the ward teams, the neighbourhood tasking team in Southwark, and we also have another chief inspector, so my colleague. Currently that's Dave Laurie, and he oversees Inspector Pippa Wilson, who's schools and youth, and Angus Marshall, who's currently overseeing the Partnership and Prevention Hub, with all the officers that we've just I've just alluded to. The next screen gives an overview, or very brief. There's an awful lot of partnership arrangements and partnership activity that goes on a daily basis. Clearly, we work very closely with our partners and community, and that's key to us achieving what we need to. We share information, intelligence, with a view to tackling issues collaboratively, and this often involves joint problem-solving patrols and shared objectives. The neighbourhood strand and local authority work very closely together on a number of topics, but including crime and ASB related issues, licensing, community outreach, and many, many more. Probably too many to put on this slide. We also have a shared awareness of threat and risk. Local authority reps dial in and are present in our daily pace setter meeting, which is where we discuss current crimes, threats and incidents that have happened from the previous day and that are ongoing. So we have a representative from Southwark at that meeting. And we also have representatives at our monthly tasking group, which was where we are presented with an overview of where our priority areas are, and we obviously share that with our partners in Southwark. In addition to that, we're also invited to the Partnership Task and Coordination Group, which is run by Southwark itself, and we actively participate in that. And clearly we look to work very closely with businesses and residents groups across the borough. Scrutiny is obviously a big thing for us, and we're trying to be, or we are, as open and transparent as we can be. And there are a number of scrutiny panels or methods that the community or yourselves can come into us and raise concerns. I've listed them all, or some of them there. So we've obviously got the Southwark IAG, or the Independent Advisory Group. We've got an LGBT plus community reference group, a ward panel chair meeting. Each ward has its own ward panel chairs, who obviously we work very closely with. We have the Youth IG, which was really key for us to be able to reach into the youth community and find out exactly what their issues and concerns are, which is something which is fairly new. And the Community Monitoring Group for Lambeth and Southwark, but for Community Monitoring Group for Southwark very much in regards to stop and search, which is, I would say, one key drivers for confidence in police and how we interact with our communities, and often fed back to us around our encounters with the public. And then separately to that, we've got the recently launched police encounter panels, which are a panel that can look at incidents that have caused community concern, recent incidents, and we can form that group together to go over that incident, share information, hopefully share footage that we have, or body-worn footage, so that can be shared at a very early stage to try and share the information about that incident and try and diffuse tensions, or give the correct information out at that very early point. And that's a very quick whistle stop of what we do in neighbourhood policing in Southwark and across the borough and across London. Clearly it's key to what we're trying to achieve, and I can't think of anything more at this stage, but I'm very open to questions, queries, or any concerns that anyone's had raised to them. Sorry, Chair.
Thanks very much, Chief Inspector. I do have questions, but I can see other members of the Commission do, so I'll come to others first. Ina, I saw you first, and then I will ask Councillor Mwanganje.
Thank you so much for the presentation. It was pretty good. Prior to COVID, it was a lot of aggression from bicycles, young people with lots of bicycles. And when I mean lot, I'm talking about hundreds. It was at one point over 400 going from Tower Bridge on the St. John's churchyard. The behavior was absolutely scary. They almost knocked people down. After the COVID, they didn't appear again. The question is, have you done anything proactively to change the behavior of those people, or there is a risk for them to return? But there is an improvement. I don't know how much is due to COVID or restriction, and what would be the risk to come back. Thank you.
Thank you. I will just ask Councillor Mwanganje to speak, and then I think there was one other. You want to put your hand back up? It was, yes, Councillor Hicks next.
Thank you, Chief Inspector Boswell, for that presentation. My first question is about the race action plan that we all received in June. How far are you in implementing it in your workplace at the moment?
Do you have further questions to add on to that? Because what I'm going to try and do is take a group of three, if that's all right for you.
So I can ask 3 questions?
No, I mean from 3 contributors, but
okay.
Maybe if you have others, we can come back to them in the next round.
Yes, we can.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Councillor Hicks.
Thank you for that overview. My question relates to, I'm aware that there are some recruitment challenges, and some of the teams that you talked about in terms of the numbers of officers that we have in different wards are somewhat depleted at the moment. I wondered how confident you were in terms of closing some of those recruitment gaps in the next few months. Thank you.
Okay, I'll start with the bike question. I am aware of that. That's a pan-London, I believe it's the Ride Out group of youth to ride around London. They do still do it. They do still gather and ride around, and that's kind of a central team who are aware of that, and are monitored by the Transport OCU, I believe. In regards to it coming to Southwark, or not coming back to Southwark, I don't know the reasons why, but there is and policing OCU who are dealing with that and engaging side have to come back to you with regards to what they've actually done in regards to that group and how they're engaging and the methods of what they have been doing. I'm not aware of the specifics around it, but all I do know is that bikes are being used in crime, so that is something that we are factoring and we are looking at. I know specifically in this area we have a number of robberies recently, and a lot of that is on bikes. We are looking at that problem, but not specifically into the ride out, which is the ASB aspects, but we're looking at the crime aspects, very much cycle enabled at the moment. And how far are we with the racing? Clearly that is a priority for us, and we need to make sure we get it right. We've got a number of actions and tasks that we are undertaking at the moment. One in regards to recruitment, as we've already spoken about, and being reflective of our communities, and we're very much aware of that's something we need to, and we work very closely with our outreach teams, and a number of outreach activities and recruitment fairs have taken place in and around Southwark, and I know that colleagues in the council have supported that as well, and people in the business community and residents have been supporting that. There's another part to how we are and how we treat our own staff and how we are more reflective and understanding. Clearly, we've all seen the media reports in regards to the Met's culture. We are fully engaging with that. We are an organisation who embrace change, and we recognise that we need to change. Clearly, there are elements or officers or people who have let us down, and we're aware of that. And it's incumbent on us and myself as a leader to make sure that we have those processes in place locally to kind of weed out the officers who are letting us down as an organisation and making comments or not behaving in a way that is conducive to what we're trying to achieve, and we're fully aware of how that is impacting our communities and the confidence in policing in Southwark and across London as a whole. And then we have obviously how we interact with our communities and the challenges that we are. And it was today I was lucky enough, although not on Southwark, but cover Lambeth as well, and it was going to a meeting with one of the local youth groups and how we're bringing together, or how the community are bringing together lots of groups in regards to youth violence and youth crime, and educating children, bringing them in, and actually having officers going in and engaging with those groups and engaging with the youths at a very low level. And that's something I'm very key, or something I'm really trying to press with our officers, definitely in the neighbourhood side. Actually, we need to go out there, engage, understand the communities, understand our youth groups, and actually just speak to them. And I say this a lot, but some of the best feedback we've had recently was where officers on this borough were patrolling, local neighbourhood officers, and just joined in a game of football with some kids in one of their kind of, I know they call it cage football, but that it just joined in, and that was some of the best interaction we've had with local youth groups. So that's something we're definitely trying to push and educate our staff around that, and very much getting community members to feed into us. Every new recruit on the borough gets an input from community members in regards to the history of each of the boroughs, so Southwark and Lambeth, so they understand the history, they understand why there is mistrust and what they can actually do, and actually how their interactions with the public and the community actually impact or can damage our relations going forward. So we are very aware of it. It is something we're focusing on, and something that is extremely important to us. Hopefully that kind of answers your questions to a bit. Okay. And sorry, finally, it was ward officer numbers. As you're probably all aware, there is a mayor's commitment to the ward officers being in place. I took over a few months ago, and we've been working very hard to get named officers for each of the wards. And we're in a lot better place than we were a few months ago. I recognise that we still have a few gaps, but that is now because of people leaving, and then there's a time lag between people who get posted off and then we recruit back in, because what I don't want to do is just put an officer there into the wards without making sure they're the right people, because I think that would be counterintuitive. So we are, I think currently we have 4 vacancies, but we have advertised for them locally, and we're currently going through the process of recruiting officers in. But as I said, they need to be the right people. who are going to be linking in with the communities. But I recognise a few months ago, and the feedback we've received and the feedback you've received in your roles is that the officers weren't there, or as many as there should have been, but we are in a much better place with a few vacancies, and we've had the additional uplift officers, which has really helped. Where there are vacancies, we do have new officers coming in who are on a rotation. So the new officers go on a rotation through response team and neighbourhoods. Where there are vacancies, we are putting them into the wards that have the vacancies to make sure there is that presence and to help the ward officer who is there. Albeit not ideal, because I know that you want communities tell us and residents tell us they want that permanent officer there. So we are working very hard to get to that stage.
Thank you for that. I have a question of my own, and then I'm going to come to some of the members on my right. The first question is quite a large one, and actually I recognise from the fact you only started the role a few months ago, it might be one that you're going to have to give us other people's answers to, as it were. But I think we'd all be interested to know what are the biggest changes to neighbourhood policing that have arisen from the pandemic, and the enormous changes that those have made for all of our lives. And then the one I do particularly want to ask about, I think it's impossible not to talk about really, is the particular impact, obviously, of the death of Sarah Everard and similar crimes. One of the groups I didn't hear very much about, in fact, I didn't think there was anything about in the presentation, was about women and girls and how trust with the police is being maintained with us as a group. So those were my questions. And then I saw Bassi has a question.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Thank you for the presentation as well. My question is around the partnership arrangements, particularly the ward panels, the panel meetings. How can you tell us a little bit more about the ward panel meetings and how engaged are the tenants and residents associations as well as the tenants management organizations that are within the individual wards? How engaged are they in that, and what are some of the challenges or issues they may have around?
It's a very similar question, actually. It states that there are 2 dedicated ward police officers in every ward. How does the community get to know who these people are? How do we know how to contact them? I have to be honest and say you're an unknown quantity to me, and I'm involved in my community. So how can we let the community know that you're there, how they can contact you? And I think it links with what you're saying. You know, there are no advertisements about ward panel meetings, or so we've got one very dedicated person who sends out a lot of emails, which is, I'm not criticising that at all, but there's no physical that we can put on notice boards or talk to people. No, nothing about this really at all. I live in Nunhead.
Shall we come back to you for answers, if that's all right, Chief Inspector?
Yes.
No, that's all right. We'll do 3. 3's, I think, are the fairest.
Do you have to remind me of the first one? Sorry.
The first one was my questions. Yes.
And, I believe that was changes since COVID to neighbourhood policing. I mean, it's a difficult one because we've seen a return of crime types, not to levels still pre-COVID. So there is definitely return of crime. I think COVID, as we all know, brought significant challenges for us all, both socially and in regards to policing wise. Socially, there's been a change, and the feedback we receive from groups is that there's been a change in crime types. There's been readily available issues such as drugs and have changed, and people are moving to different types of criminal activity, this specific to crime. In regards to neighbourhood policing, our structure hasn't changed. So everything policing wise, everything you see that I've presented there today is pretty much how it was pre-COVID, other than the additional officers for the wards, and as well as recognising that there are some liaison officers that we have recruited recently. So the LGBTQ and we've recruited them recently. In regards to structure, not a lot for us, but we have seen an increase in certain crimes post-COVID, and that's very much linked to footfall increases, people going back to work, and people being allowed back on the street. But I don't know if that really answers your question, but our actual structure hasn't changed an awful lot, but actual demand is very much getting back to where it was. Yeah, and I apologise wholeheartedly for not having that in. That is obviously key to this borough. We all, as in where I work, I know it's not Southwark, but it definitely has implication. I think we recognise that one incident, as horrific as it was, has had real wide sweeping ramifications for trust with women and girls with the police force, which for me, speaking personally, is really sad, because I know all the good officers that we have, and 99% of the officers we have are here for the right reason and want to work with our communities and want and were just as outraged, sometimes in a different way, I think, because we had been massively let down. That's specific to the Sarah Everardington. I think we all know that it's horrific. The right person was obviously found. He's serving his sentence, but it does hurt, and it still hurts when I hear that, and the impact it's had and trust with us being a police officer and a male police officer as well. In regards to the violence against women and girls policy agenda, is very much at the forefront. Violence across London is a priority, and part of that strand is obviously violence against women and girls, and that's obviously out on the streets, domestic violence and other types. So we are very much focusing on that. We've got leads on the borough, which is led by our safeguarding department, very much lead on that aspect in regards to the policy and the actual strand leads for it. However, the neighbourhood strand very much link into that. And we were the pioneers for the kind of walk and talk scheme, which is where people are able to go and walk with female officers in and around areas where they feel unsafe, and just talk on a level, which is what we're trying to encourage with our ward officers. Actually just talk to the officers, tell them about where their fears, why they fear certain areas, or their understanding or their perceptions of the area. And additionally, we've been pushing, I think, in this area we've got specific violence against women and girls is a kind of street safe app, which we're really pushing out in our communities now. So that's engaging with females, asking them to go onto the website and actually anonymously telling us where they feel unsafe, the reasons why they feel unsafe. It's a website that the Met and the Home Office have, and we're definitely pushing that out. So good practice in Streatham, where we kind of trialled it, is that we give QR codes and we actually actively go and engage with our communities and say, this is out there, please engage with it. You can tell us where you feel unsafe, you can tell us why you feel unsafe in certain areas, which has really been positive. And now we're rolling that across the BCU as well as good practice. But it's very much a priority for us. We're very aware of that. And youth violence are the two key priorities for us in regards to the violence agenda.
Thank you. Just before you turn to the other two answers in that round, can I just push you on the point about liaison? I think I'm right in saying there is no dedicated liaison officer with women and girls. Is that right? Has that been considered?
It definitely has been considered, something we're pushing. We have to obviously get approval for that. We have got a dedicated violence against women and girls lead who sits within the safeguarding strand.
Mm-hmm. But that's not neighbourhood, is that right?
Neighbourhoods we don't, but I will take that back and speak to Mr. Ivy in regards to that. So we have for other aspects. So yeah, I'll definitely take that back and
thank you.
Communicate. We do have it as a borough, but it doesn't sit within the neighbourhood strand. It doesn't mean it's not there. We still work very closely with them.
Okay, thank you.
But I'll ask, do we need one, as in yes? Or
that would be great. Thank you. And now I redirect you to the other questions.
The ward panels and how we interact. Is that right? I think it's safe to say that there is a difference across all the wards, and that's very much linked to officer engagement, ward panel chair engagement, ward panel engagement. My aim is that we really push this in the next year, to actually actively engage. And for me, that is my officers. I need to tell them or impress upon them the importance and hold them to account to make sure that they are linking in very closely with their ward panels and ward panel chairs, because that relationship should be a very close one. But I recognise that there's a difference across all the wards. Some are functioning better than others, and that's the feedback we're receiving. So I have been sitting down with Tom Cornish, who's the inspector for the wards, to work through each of them, see how active each ward panel is. Do we need to refresh them? Do we need to engage better with the ward chairs? Do we need to reach out to them? But it should be very much a ward chair led as well, to work with us. We need to build that relationship. But I do recognise that some work better than others. We need to understand why and what the blockages are. And sorry, the next part. Yeah. That's frequent. Since I've joined the area, that has been feedback from some of the chairs that we don't see the officers, we don't know them, but that's not across all of them. How do we know what police are doing? Communications is key for me, because I'm very much, if we're doing something, if we're working in partnership, have done something exceptional, then we need to tell you about it, because there's no point us doing our activities if we're not telling the community about it, because it's very much linked to trust and confidence and feedback from yourself. So if it's not happening, we need to look into it. We have got a dedicated, I think put up there, dedicated media and comms officer who works under the neighbourhood strand. So I had a meeting with them today about how we can reach a wider audience, and we're very much limited at the moment to Twitter and emails, which isn't necessarily the best way to communicate. And Nextdoor, and Nextdoor we do use a lot, but we're looking at actually, are there other platforms that we can use, more so around our kind of youth element, or working with the community to find out which platforms do they use. So can we use TikTok, can we use Instagram to actually circulate information, as well as actually what we said is key is the ward panel chairs, resident associations, using them to distribute information for us as well, and meeting agenda times. It is on our website. All the websites should be updated with when the next meetings are, and I'm sure I'll be told that that doesn't happen all the time, but it is something I'm aware of, and it's something, again, as a performance indicator that we're holding the ward team to account for. So they have got each team has now got performance indicators of what we're looking at for them to achieve, and that is very much one of them.
Follow up.
Just what resources do you have? You say you can use the website. How do people know that? If they're a problem, I wouldn't know who to ring. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't, don't have any of that information. So it's got to start from the basics, hasn't it? What resources do you have so that, you know, we can, we don't have to rely on thinking, or I'll have to go to the website if I want to find out anything about anything. We need things that we can actually view, and in communities, that information should be, people should be able to cite it without having to.
Yeah, I mean, if you don't know in your role, then that's a concern for me, and I'll have to look into why you don't know. And if you don't know, then that means the community don't know, residents don't know, because we should be engaging with you. So I'll have to go back and have a look at where the issues are, where the blockages are, and why you don't know, for one, and what is going wrong in that ward in Nunhead, that the community and yourself don't know how to contact your local team. Yes, there is the website, which does give you information. Metropolitan Police website does give you a breakdown and contact number for them, but they should be providing that information to yourselves. If that's not happening, I need to understand why and make that better. So that's something I'll take away from this. I will make sure that happens. We review it, and I can't give you the answer now because clearly it's not happening. I need to understand why not.
Yeah.
But I will give you that commitment that I will review across all of the wards to find out how active they are, what information we're giving out, and actually brings some consistency across all the wards.
I think that consistency point is probably going to come up repeatedly. Just to move on so that everyone gets their questions in, the next on my list are actually sitting in order. So could we hear from Councillors Hargrove, Mwanganje and Tester, please?
Thank you, Chair. Presentation, Chief. Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your presentation, Chief Inspector. I have three very brief questions. First one is a follow-up from the reps from the community organisations. And I can only speak about the ward panel in the area where I'm a councillor. I can remember years ago the police used to fund the cost of a secretary for the ward panel. And it's only luck, and I don't know what the latest situation, because it's only started up again since COVID, but it was only luck that there was a lady who didn't even live in the ward that really took an interest in the ward panel and provided voluntary secretarial duties for the award panels. Now, I think the ward panels are really important, as the community reps do, and I think it's just a little bit hit and miss to rely on whether there's a volunteer from the community that can do usually the most difficult work of a community organisation is to be the secretary. So don't know whether there's any plans in future for the police to provide secretarial duties for the ward panels. And following on from that question, I also wondered, what more could, say, for neighbourhood teams doing if they had more members or more bodies on the neighbourhood policing beat. And my third question is around the schools teams. I know you don't have any direct management responsibility for them, but I wondered if you could just give us some idea about what the schools team do to prevent youth crime and ASB.
Are you happy to take other questions before you give an answer?
Yes, I've taken some notes.
Okay.
My brain wasn't good enough to keep all three in my head. Yeah.
My questions, the first one is on a follow-up from what you were saying about weeding out the police officers who essentially shouldn't be serving and protecting our community. What is the process for that? And also in regards to the recruitment as well, what is the process to make sure that we are recruiting police officers that actually represent the communities we're from? For example, in Camberwell and Camberwell, Green and Newington, where there's a high, and St. Giles, where there's a high level of Black Asian ethnic minority communities in there. And then the other question is to do with stops and searches. Obviously, we know that they're increasing. And that is, for some people, it makes them feel safer. But for us within the Black community, it doesn't make us feel safer knowing that the police doesn't actually represent the community that it's actually supposed to be basically doing the stops and searches in that area. What are you doing in terms of those stops and searches to make sure that you are not profiling, people specifically within the Black community? And I will target drug related searches. I am actually in the ward panel for Goose Green. Well, I'm not on it, but I go to the ward panels for Goose Green and they talk heavily about drug searches. What are you doing to expand the stops and the decision making in the stop and searches that you are conducting to make sure that it's not just one factor, which normally is about smell? Outside of that, what are the range of factors that you're taking into consideration when you are stopping and searching somebody? I hope that is okay. If it's not, please let me know.
No, it is. It is.
Yeah?
I'll just take some notes.
Yeah, okay.
I stop searches.
One last question. Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your presentation. And I note that you'd said that 7 wards have received an uplift in dedicated police officers, which is obviously really good news. Are you able to give a little bit more detail about why those wards particularly were selected? And do you think there'll be sort of further scope for additional wards to receive that extra support in the future?
Right. I'll just read my notes. Sorry, now. So I think the first question was in regards to funding for secretary for the ward panels. I wasn't aware that was ever the case. I don't know when it was. It may be that it went after austerity and we had to make cuts, but that's something I can definitely take away and have a look at. But I wasn't aware. I can't make promises with cuts and the like that we will be able to fund that moving forward, and anything we provide is then not officered. Yeah.
the facts, advice.
But I do understand it's a key role, and if there is anything we can do to support people or support that role or help recruit, then obviously we will try that. But I will try and find out exactly what the position is, and if it is the position that we should be, then I'll let you know. The next was what more can safer neighbours do if they had more people on the beat. Is that right? I suppose me being selfish, I'd love to have lots more officers and having the right, but for me it's most definitely about having the right officers in the right place who are well briefed, to understand the sensitivities of both Southwark and Lambeth, because there's definitely a crossover both in people who move between the two and the officers, so they need to understand both. If we had lots of officers briefed well, then clearly it would be a positive thing. We are, as I said, we've just had an uplift in officers in regards to the wards that I've mentioned, and I'll go on to the reasons why those wards were picked in a later question. We do have the tasking team, which I've alluded to, who are there, who do work pan borough, and I'm reviewing their kind of terms of reference and what they are doing and making sure that they are there to service the ward teams more. That's something I'm looking at now, and looking at how they're tasked to make sure that they are tasked in regards to not only priorities for the whole borough, but actually ward priorities, because they're often different. What residents and communities want as a ward priority isn't always. We obviously have the top priority, which is violence, robbery related, and then the ones below that for the wards are potentially, where it's what the residents, what the wards have asked, so that they're targeting them and supporting them as well with them. Of course, I'd love to have more officers, but we are very much constrained by what we're given. There is a model which is reflected across London that we have to work to. Sorry, yes, that is the next one. So what the schools teams doing to prevent youth crime and ASB and what they're doing. The whole schools piece is a huge piece of work, and I was speaking to Pippa, who's the dedicated inspector for the schools team in Southwark. It would probably take me or take her a long time to explain, but I'm more than happy, not that I'm deflecting, to get a presentation. I know she's done a presentation in regards to what they're doing. So very much it's around, we obviously cover not only the secondary schools where we have a dedicated officer, but we do cover the primary schools as well. And I was speaking to one of our engagement officers today who is very keen that we get officers to go into the primary schools, because they often get neglected. I believe we focus on secondary schools, and actually we need to build those relationships very early with our children and get them used to speaking and engaging with police officers. So we're looking at how we can do that with the schools, albeit there are an awful lot of primary schools compared to secondary schools. So it is a challenge, but that is something we're looking at, how we can achieve that. And that'd be very much local neighbourhood teams will be going in to do that, obviously with the school's consent. We go into schools, we engage with them, we have presentations around their own safety, presentations around crime, online crime, all plethora of things that we're able to give inputs into children and people of school age, as well as supporting them with their safety in and around routes, and we plot routes that are the most troublesome on our way home, both in regards to other schools meeting them, or actually where children feel unsafe or are subject to crime, robbery being one of the most prolific and probably the most underreported crimes that we see, because children often don't report that to us, and I'm aware of that. I touched on the safer streets. We are trialling that for children as well now on this borough. So actually engaging with the schools and engaging with the children and asking them to tell us where they feel unsafe and why, which I think is a really positive step forward, and actually giving them a voice and to tell us where they feel unsafe, but anonymously, so they don't actually have to put their name to it, but actually this road is unsafe, this is where people congregate, this is where kids in this school get robbed, or these are the people doing it potentially, or this is where the groups gather. So actually giving them a voice, which I think is a really positive step forward. But schools, I think they work really hard. They also They work with the truancy teams, the welfare schools officers, or the people in the schools who work in welfare. They engage with obviously the partnerships, local authority around kids or children who are in troubled or have troubled lifestyles or troubled home lives. So we do engage with them around that as well. So an awful lot that the schools do. Hopefully that gives an overview, but if you do need any more information, Pippa, who is the lead, has a presentation, and by all means we can give that to you. I can get you a briefing note. Yeah. That goes. Do actions come out of this, or should I? I don't know.
Yes, I was going to suggest at the end, actually. I think Amit's going to be able to liaise with you about some of the things that you've
that's great. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't have to write it down now, but I'm more than happy to say actions away and get that for you. Yeah, no,
that's great. Just being mindful of time, I think it's got a few more questions that you've already got, and I've got some final ones to wrap up with, and then move on.
Weeding out the police officers, what's the process? There are a number of processes. It can be at the highest level, police officers who commit crime. We probably, I don't know if you saw, but an officer was on this BCU, was arrested, charged, remanded only yesterday for a violence offence. So we have that where complaints are made by the public or by victims of crime. So that's obviously one aspect where we are able to weed out officers. We have internal processes where officers can raise concerns to supervisors. And we also have an anonymous, it's called the Right Line, where they can feed their concerns about officers straight into our Department of Professional Standards. So they have that platform as well. And I think key for me around cultures, and when we talk about what we need to do, is actually supporting staff or colleagues who come forward and say, I've got concern about this person and reasons why, and actually giving them that support afterwards. And I think that's been a real step change in the last few months for the Metropolitan Police, actually recognising we have got an issue and providing staff and being open to learning, and other organisations coming in and giving us advice about what we need to do. But there are lots of mechanisms for weeding them out, and obviously we've got when new recruits come in, they are subjected to certain checks. That doesn't always get all the bad ones. It's very, very difficult if someone's got no criminal history to actually recognise that there are issues, but then it's us as staff to actually raise our concerns at a very early level. And we are getting, I'll be honest, we are getting better at it, and we're supporting staff and we're making sure that staff feel they can come forward. Recruitment, or it's a process to ensure we recruit Black and ethnic minority officers. That is, I recognise, I think the Met recognises that is a challenge because of historic mistrust and issues with the police. And I was having a conversation today about that. I also oversee the Brixton Town Centre team, and it's great we've got a town centre team now, but the community feedback, it's great you've got a town centre team, but there's not a Black person on it. So I get that. I've had conversations with with the Black Police Association, with local leads, our diversity forum lead in regards to Lambeth and Southwark, and our recruitment leads. And as I said, touched on earlier, we do a lot of recruitment events in the borough. We are getting people joining. Unfortunately, what it looks like is they're not putting Lambeth and Southwark as an option. So I need to understand why our community who may be joining aren't putting this borough as an option. And it is sad. I've spoken to two officers, Black officers on the borough. One is going off to another job, another one who was racially abused. She wasn't racially abused by white officers or white people. It was by, as we'd say, her own community, which is really sad. And that is what we're finding, that Black officers on the borough often get subjected to horrific abuse by sometimes the Black community, which is a problem for us and a problem for our Black members of staff. So that's something I'm looking at now, how we can actually work with the community, how we can work with residents around not educating them, but actually feeding back that we've got really good officers who want to work, who want to change, who want to be reflective, but actually if they're being abused, and this is the feedback we're getting from them, that they don't put Lambeth Southwark as an option potentially because they're getting targeted, which is quite sad. So we need to understand why, and we need to work with the communities around that, about education, and actually this is what happened. But I do recognise it's a problem, but we are obviously reaching out, and it is a priority for us to make sure that we're more reflective. But and in addition, we are getting into kids and youth groups and cadets, and actually giving them pathways and break. I think for me, we very much need to break down the barriers with children, youths at an early stage, and make them see that it's a career that they can engage with and can become part of. Because people will become security officers, they will become enforcement officers, PCSOs, they'll work for the Met. It's just literally the uniform that is a barrier at the moment, so we need to overcome that. But that's something we need to do together. It's not just us who can do that. Stop and search, I could probably talk about this. I think this is the one single most important or driver for trust within our Black community. I think we recognise that, and that's something I'm very aware of. And what we're doing to ensure we're not profiling people specifically. Drugs, I've got drug search as opposed to knife. I've mentioned that. I don't think you said knife, but that should be our priority, and I agree we should be targeting if our priority is violence and youth violence, and I think we all know that there are people carrying knives and there are people using them in Southwark, and I think we recognise that, but actually we need to make sure that our officers are targeting the people carrying knives. So that's about educating our staff around what our priorities are. We are very much doing that, putting them in the right area, and telling them that actually you're there to deal with knives. It is difficult when an officer sees someone smoking or smells drugs, that they have a duty to actually deal with that, because it is still a crime. But for me, and the feedback I always receive, it's about that interaction. It's about how we engage, and we're doing a lot of work locally around the perception of what stop and search looks like for officers. So if it's a van, do we need to have the van parked there with 6 officers around one kid, which looks oppressive? And often we get the feedback that is the case. So I'm doing some work with our neighbourhood teams. They're fully aware, and whenever we get external units, because we know we get external units who come and police it because it is a high profile area, we need to make sure we engage with them around the sensitivities. They get a briefing around areas where we are particularly sensitive and trust issues, and the approach that we want them to take when they're on this borough. They should be anyway, but it's just reaffirming that to them. So, and feeding back to them the community concerns around what the interaction looks like. And actually the officer doesn't have to have the last word, and they need to be humble, and we're the professionals. So if someone wants to say something, they need to be professional and just let them say that. It's not an I've been stopped, not as much as many people in Lambeth and Southwark, but I did grow up in Croydon and I was in the streets, so I have been stopped before, and I do kind of get the two or three times I was stopped, how that impacted on me and how people were looking at me, and I was aware of that. So I completely get the issue around stop and search, albeit not to the degree that I know some of our community gets stopped. But we need to balance that with actually there is an issue with knives in the community, and I don't think we can necessarily apologise if we do it correctly, because we're taking 300 knives off the street a year, which is a lot of knives, not Southwark, but across London we're taking an awful lot of knives off the street. We wouldn't be able to do that without stop and search. But for me, it's about how we do that correctly and how we interact and how we leave that encounter, and then being open and transparent if we have done it poorly, to actually hold our hands up and engage with the person stopped, engage with the community at an early level, and actually learn from it and take that forward and not be hesitant to learn.
Can I just make a comment on the ward panels? I think there needs to be an encouragement of community groups joining ward panels, because I feel like that's the best way that you're going to be able to engage them. So if there is a plan around that, that would be great.
Yeah, no, we've been reviewing all our panels to make sure they're reflective of our communities, and that's not just in groups, but that's in age as well. So that's why we've got youth IAGs as well. We're very cute that a lot of our activities impact younger people, and they're the ones who impact. So we need to reach out and give them a voice as well.
Thank you. If you're able just to take on Councillor Tester's question, I'm keen not to keep our second speaker waiting too much longer.
Yep. Sorry.
It's,
why those wards? Oh, why did the wards? Yeah, sorry, I've got that there. Apologies. So it wasn't a local decision for the wards. It was a Met-wide decision. So wards across London received extra officers. We're fortunate that we got 7 wards in Southwark who got the additional, but that is very much down to demand. Crime stats. It was factored around the issues in those wards and where we believed the demand was biggest, and to support those wards with the extra officers. It was not as basic as that, but it was very much down to demand and the challenges of each of the wards across London. But Southwark got 7, which obviously says what a priority the area is and that we're investing in the area.
Thank you. Sorry, was there a follow-up?
There was a sort of a bit of a second part of the question, which was, do you think there would be sort of scope in the future for
yes,
more
I did like
uplifts or yeah?
Potentially, but not at the moment. The commitment to 2 ward officers is a mayor's commitment, and that's what the mayor's directed. So that's MOPAC, and then additionally we've gone to 4 for some. I haven't heard anything about additional wards at the moment, but if there are any particularly challenging wards locally, I have that ability to put extra officers there because we've got a tasking team, we've got people on rotation. So we do have that flexibility locally, and we do, obviously our tasking groups, we do move people across the wards to support the ward officers, but not in regards to dedicated wards, nothing at the moment.
Thank you. Chief Inspector, we're very grateful for all of the answers that you've given so far. I wanted to just finish with a really quick question. We've, I think, asked you for a lot this evening, and you've very kindly offered to send some further information. But I think I'm interested in what you need from us, actually. All the councillors on this commission are ward councillors, so our role is to have that really local relationship with our communities, and it's also to hold the council leadership to account. So what is it that we can most usefully do to support you and your teams?
I think we probably touched on it in regards to the wards and the ward panels, and actually there's a part for us to play, clearly, as we've already discussed, but it's about engaging with us, and I think in regards to the ward chairs, we actually need to do that with the councillors as well. And you need to, I think for you, it's I know they need to hold local authority to account. You need to engage with us and hold us to account, and that very much tell us what the residents, what your communities are feeding into you, and then feed that into us. Because I am very much a believer that we should be doing what the communities and residents want. So for me, that's the one biggest thing I'd ask of you. If you haven't got that relationship, or you're coming up against barriers in regards to that relationship with your local teams, is feed that back into me, and I can make sure that that's rectified, because we need you and we need to be working closely with you. So for me, that's the biggest thing. I know, I think you said someone new, but that's what I want you to do, and do hold us to account as well. I've given a slide on scrutiny, but part of that is actually you and having those relationships, and we work better where we have those relationships with councillors, MPs, ward panel chairs, and I think if we will work together, I genuinely believe crime comes down, or we achieve a lot more if we do work together. So that's, for me, is actually hold us to account of feedback where you get blockages. Don't just think you haven't got an avenue.
Chief Inspector, thank you very much. I don't think we can justify keeping you here any longer and risking London being less safe. And thanks for
the officers are out there. Don't worry about that.
Well, thank goodness for that. And thank you for all the things you offered to send us as well. Please do feel free to step down. Can I suggest Commission members might want a very short comfort break before we move on to our next speaker? Perhaps if we are able to start again is 3 minutes a bit military, or is that reasonable? Should we say, all right, let's do 2 to 3 minutes, and then we'll start again. Thank you. I think we will start the second half of the meeting. Welcome to Dominic Kane, who has joined us. Let me just say at the outset that Ade Aderemi, who is the head of customer services that we initially invited, is on leave. So Dominic's very kindly offered to fill in. And you're going to summarise the presentation that you've previously sent. I did just want to do a bit of an introduction about why we're asking the question. I've already mentioned that quite a lot of us here are new councillors. The question of repairs comes up time and time again on the doorstep. I'm sure that's true for not just the Labour Party, but other parties. I am also aware that it has come up through scrutiny, and this isn't the first time that repairs has been on the agenda for this commission or its predecessor commission. So I am aware that there were meetings that addressed particular issues and had presentations in both March and February of this year. And then previously there's an improvement plan that was approved by Cabinet in 2020, April 2020, and then some recommendations made by the Scrutiny Commission for that year that were adopted in December 2020. However, what I don't see when I look at those documents is a specific emphasis on the contact centre, which is after all where people's experience with the repairs centre begins. So that's the purpose of having it on the agenda tonight, as well as to provide some continuity with some of the issues that have been raised previously. So I hope that gives some helpful context. And with that, can I invite you to give us your summary?
Thank you. Yep, that's really helpful. And Addy does send his apologies. He's actually only off for one day, so it's unfortunate he can't be here this evening. So I've had responsibility for the contact centre since January 21. And it's fair to say there have been a number of challenges throughout that period, not least COVID, emergency repairs for a period of time as well, home working for staff in a front-facing environment, and some managerial challenges that we've had within customer service. So key for me was to look at how we can best fix some of those challenges and work through with the staff base that we've got and come up with an improvement plan. And as you rightly said, Chair, it's about the end-to-end process, and it starts with the contact centre. So key, from my perspective, is working very closely with Christine and the repairs team, and how we can improve from right from the point that people contact us. Not least, we still get a huge volume of calls coming through to the contact centre. If you looked at some of the stats, 270,000 calls into contact centre, it means that we have a requirement for a fair degree of staff to answer those calls in a timely fashion. So it's an ongoing challenge, not least how we look at things like building on digital development. So are there other ways that we can approach developing the repairs service, and what are the challenges in terms of quality assurance, ensuring people get the repair from the initial identification at the first point of contact. And I don't know if you've seen the stats, I'll come on to talk about that. There are still a degree of repeat callers coming in, and key for me and Addy is to ensure that we reduce that as soon as we can. And I know there's a lot of work that's taken place within the repairs team to ensure that we do deal with the backlog that has existed since the point that they were dealing with emergency repairs. I'm pleased to say that they've confirmed that that's the case. I report regularly into Cabinet members, both Councillors Cryan and Merrill, on the improvements, and certainly they're holding me to account to ensure that we see improvements, transformation in the front-facing services, and in particular repairs. So I know it's a big issue, and I'm not coming here tonight to say we've fixed it. There are a number of things that require ongoing work and huge amounts of time, effort and energy investment to ensure that we get to the place that everyone expects us to get to. So where are we coming from? So at the point that I took over responsibility for the contact centre, as I said, there's some managerial challenges. We had some staffing issues. It was the first time that staff had actually been working at home. So we hadn't had people home working, answering calls within the contact centre prior to COVID. So we had some challenges to ensure that we got that up and running effectively. I'm pleased to say that that did work. But we did see a slight decrease in productivity, which we've now looked to address, or Addy's been working hard to do that. Not least if you are dealing with emergency repairs for a period of time, that then creates capacity issues going forward that we have to address, ensure that we've got sufficient trays to deal with the repairs going forward. So as I said earlier, we've been working hard with the back office to ensure that we've got resources to deal with that. And that's not always straightforward, to ensure that we've got sufficient resources to deal with every repair in a timely fashion. So there are issues and they're working through those. As you said right at the start, Chair, the repairs improvement plan, we have a contact centre improvement plan, and it's my aim and Addy's aim to ensure the two are aligned. And certainly some of the improvements that we've been working on in partnership with the repairs team are highlighted within that plan. We're not there yet, but we're working closely with them to ensure that that takes place. For instance, we've done things like working closely to ensure that where we're scheduling repairs, so there are warm handoffs, so we hand over the customer to the back office. So it's different ways of working than we've worked in past, looking at different operational approaches to how we handle calls to ensure that we resolve it at the first point of contact. So that's not happened before, and certainly Scrutiny had picked up on that last time that there was a presentation to the committee. That work is ongoing. And certainly what we don't want to do is put in place a completely different operational model without ensuring that we test it. We have a feasibility study and we work on ensuring we understand what the impact is, not least from a cost perspective as well as a customer experience perspective. So that work is ongoing. But what have we done and where are we at currently? So a lot of the staffing issues that existed have been dealt with. Some of the management capacity issues that existed have also been dealt with, not least Addy coming into post with effect from this December. You will see from the stats, there have been some challenges around call handling. So I'm pleased to report back to committee that 95% of the calls coming into the contact centre are now been answered. There's a 5% abandonment rate. That, if you look at the stats over a period of time, that's a significant improvement on where we were. And not least December, there was only, I think it was 82%. So, to get to that point in June is significant. We've increased staffing levels. So from 38 full-time equivalents, we've now got 50 people that are just specifically dealing with repairs calls within the contact centre. And in terms of call waiting times, right back to December, they were 7.5 minutes. June, that's 1.5 minutes. So in terms of general performance, there's significant improvement across the contact centre. Now that's an average. That's not to say at some peak times, customers, residents experience different waiting times, but overarchingly, we're starting to see some of the improvements that Addy's been working on coming through. We're also scheduling repairs earlier, so from 8 a.m., not 9 o'clock, and at the point that we hand off to out of hours, there's also an extended handoff period. So we ensure that we're not at peak times when people are coming home from work. We've still got resources there to be able to deal with some of the calls that are coming into the contact centre. So where do we go from here? So I spoke briefly about transforming the customer experience. I've given an undertaking with the repairs team that we will look at different approaches to reviewing the operational model, and that includes the potential for the back office team to deal with the call handling. And I've spoken to the Director of Asset Management to review that, and we're starting that process now. Key for me was ensuring we got capacity within the teams, that we fixed some of the initial problems, which has happened. The head of customer service is now dealing with 2 restructures within the team that I think will create greater management capacity, a focus on quality, and further improvements. And that will take at least 6 months to bed in. That said, I talked briefly about some of the digital work. There's a lot of work to do around how we can improve that. The customer access strategy is key to that. We've also got people emailing. That doesn't sit within the contact centre. It sits within a different customer experience team within the council. So we need to look at how we align all of the improvements across the various different elements of the service. And that includes clear points of identification at the first point of contact. So how do we improve the quality assurance at that first point of contact? So that's briefly where we're at. I know that you'd asked for some further information around the description of the types of repairs we're getting. Still the highest proportion is, this probably doesn't help, but general repairs, heating up, hot water, communal repairs, and roofing are the top 5 biggest areas that we're still getting repairs through from. So that's broadly where we're at. And as I said right at the start, it's still a work in progress, still a lot of work to undertake, but I'm confident that with our new head of service, we're making significant inroads to improve the service. Look, we're only as good as the last call that a customer made to the contact centre. I sit next to them, I hear the calls that they're answering, and I hear the quality of service. And it's, yeah, the things that we can do, but I think there's significant improvement that's been made. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. I'm going to dive in with a couple of questions and then come to other commission members. First one is that referring as I have to some of the earlier commission meetings that talked about the repairs service, I'm aware there was some discussion, I think in February, about having a fully integrated service, so that the call centre becomes a specialist, part of a specialist service. And there was a commitment to doing that. I believe there were conversations held with Islington, which already have that model. Are we any further along now than we were in February? That's my first question. Second one, I'm afraid, is very wonkish. Are there any key performance indicators specifically around the contact centre? Is it all right to do rounds of 3 again? Is that going to be over? Yeah. So Chris Claridge was first, and then Bassie.
Yeah, it's a couple of queries. When you spoke about the 2 ways of reporting repair, either email or phone, what requests get the preference? How is that dealt with? You said that the starting time now is 8 o'clock to be able to report a repair. That certainly hasn't been right. I've spent a week dealing with a repair that started off as a simple, needed a ball cock, I think, replacement, and has now accumulated in now we're waiting for the person's ceiling to be repaired where the water went through, and literally every time an operative arrived, they made another error, which made us quite. I've got to say, the call centre, the women we spoke to at the call centre, they were all of them faultless as far as we were concerned. They were very polite. They did the best they could. They went at the next stage. But the first thing we were told on the Saturday, there was this particular repair was an emergency, and that was given a reference number. An hour later, we got a phone call. This is not my personal repair. This is somebody on the estate. We got a phone call to say they decided no, it wasn't an emergency. So they would have to ring again on the Monday. This is somebody that's got no water upstairs in her house. So I was expected to carry hot water from downstairs to upstairs. This isn't an emergency. But when she rang again on the Monday, she had to have, they couldn't refer to the job number we'd been given, so she was then given another one. She was told someone was going to attend on the 6th of July. They finally, we finally had to ring back on the 9th of July to report the repair, the same repair that we'd reported on the 4th of July. They attended the same day, and then 2 hours later, the problem was the same. So we were then given another job number. And it was a simple thing of the repair was done, but there was a small part that needed to be replaced and it wasn't, and it snapped within a couple of hours of the replacement being made, and she then ended up with water coming through her bedroom ceiling. So now we've had to report, somebody came out, they did see that as an emergency. It only took them 3 hours to come while the water's coming through her bedroom ceiling, which 3 hours, I rang and said, this is a lot of water coming through in 3 hours. So now we've now got another job number, and she's got to wait for someone to come and look at the ceiling and then decide when they're going to repair it. Now, I know that's only one example, but so one of my questions about that is, it's a catalogue of errors, isn't it? So but every job that was done had to have a new numbers, and each time the person left, they took a photograph to show that the job had been completed. So it looks as though there have been 4 different repairs done, which have all been photographed as being completed, when in fact the first call has resulted in a ceiling having to be repaired. Yeah. And that's just one example. And for you to say, the call time, at least one of those phone calls, I was on the phone for 40 minutes waiting for someone to pick the phone up.
Can I just ask, is there going to be a question that Dominic can answer? It's fine just to make a statement that was obviously a terrible case, but I think if we're going to have a question.
My question's around the statements that you've made, that these things are happening, no, it's not starting from 8 o'clock in the morning. And, are you looking at the quality of the operatives? Because it's obviously not very skillful work been going on. And then the fact that you take photographs to show you've done a good job is, the whole thing just, the whole thing is a question, really.
Okay, thank you. Bassi, would you mind asking your question and let Dominic answer?
I think my question is around 2 areas. One is around the number of referrals, or let me put it this way, jobs that should have been handled, repairs, for example, that should have been handled or should have gone to, or is something that is being handled by the tenant management organizations. How many of those are you getting that is coming through? And also, what's the kind of relationship in terms of how you manage that? I know initially at the beginning, jobs that where there was a TMO, whenever the call came to the call center, the first thing was to refer the call or the caller to the TMO, rather than looking at it to make sure that that job actually should be going, or that repair should be done by TMO or not. So we had a lot of instances where that wasn't handled properly. So I just want to know whether whether there's still that kind of tension there. And 2, I was looking at the contact center repairs call stats. Yeah, so looking at the chart here, can you explain what you describe as abandoned calls? Because there seems to have been going up. It's only recently that it's started coming down. So what's that? Can you describe that?
Thank you. There's a lot there. I hope you're happy to come back in now, Dominic.
Thanks. There's some points I can answer, some I can't. So in terms of the operational model, certainly, Chair, we're reviewing the approaches to how the call handling is undertaken. So there's a number of things that we've had to do. Certainly over the last year, we've been fixing some issues that existed within the team. I took you through some of those just when I was giving a summary. And in discussion with Director of Asset Management, have given an undertaking that we'll review a feasibility study. And I think in the last scrutiny report, it was review the opportunity to have a look at different ways of working. So certainly that will be undertaken. What I want to do is ensure that the 2 restructures that are taking place do take place first, because I think they're crucial to ensuring that continuous improvement takes place. But that won't stop us reviewing the potential for us to work in different ways going forward. So if it sits alongside the back office repairs team, that's an option. It's also an option that we have more specialist workers within the contact centre front office environment. That's also an option, but we haven't got an answer to that yet. We're going to undertake a feasibility study over the next few weeks, and I can come back to you, or Addy can come back to you at the point that we have an answer to that question. In terms of performance management, there's a suite of performance management targets that I receive on a daily basis that reports on performance. And certainly some of those key targets like abandonment rates, call waiting times, call handling times are reported at a departmental level to the housing modernisation corporate stats for that department. So there's a whole suite of management performance stats that are there to manage the service on a daily, weekly, monthly basis that are reviewed. So moving on to preference around reporting and emails. So call handling and emails, it's a good question. In terms of the emails coming through, there's a statistic, there's a requirement that those are answered within 7 days. Obviously, somebody coming through to the contact centre would have an immediate response, then it would go through to the back office. So it's slightly different approach for emails. I think for me, it's about reviewing that whole customer experience and ensuring that we've got consistency going forward. And I don't think we're there yet. So I think there's more work to do in that space. So in terms of priorities, somebody calling, and that's probably why we've still got 270,000 calls coming through to the contact centre on a yearly basis. Somebody would get an immediate response speaking to a call handler, particularly if there's been a previous repair issued. And as I said, also through the presentation, we've still got a number of duplicate calls coming through, repeat callers that some work needs to take place to ensure that we reduce them. In response to your specific example, I can't speak on behalf of asset management in relation to the trades people that have gone out to identify the repair. And thank you for your kind comments around the actual call handling from a customer centre perspective. That's good to hear. Clearly, there needs to be ownership from start to finish of a job. And in my view, it's not ideal that we're having a person calls once with a repair and we're having to follow it up with 4 different individual service ticket numbers. It should just be handled from the initial conversation. And if I know one of the things that the Director of Asset Management is currently looking at is multi-skilled tradespeople, so that if there's an issue they send up to the property and there's another issue that could be dealt with at in that same call, that they can deal with that. But that's not straightforward. There's a number of challenges to that. But sorry to the resident who's experienced those issues. And outside of this meeting, if you've got that, if you can ping me the details, I'll obviously look into it. Yeah, no, it's a good example.
Just worried about the skills that some are very young, but they actually should have some covered. Because when you say about multi-skills, each skill should have.
I'm really just keen that we know I understand, because it isn't, this is why we put it on the agenda. It's a really important issue, but I am just keen that we stick to the contact centre specifics, because that's the brief that we gave Dominic. But yes, was there anything else you had on that particular question?
That's it.
Okay, in which case there was also.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks very much. And so I haven't got the answers to the TMOs. I will have to refer back to Addy for that specific response, because there will be some more information that sits within some detail that I haven't got in front of me today. So I apologise, I'll have to come back to you on that. In terms of number of referrals, obviously the contact centre staff will have, they've got clear scripts that relate to, and training that relates to specific examples of communal repairs or examples where Southwark's responsible for it. In terms of the description of abandoned calls, so I mean, key for me is obviously average waiting time. And sorry to hear that example that you gave. And one of the specifics that we wanted to fix is the handover at the point it goes to out of hours. And that was a particular challenge. I think they fixed it. And sorry, I didn't come back to you on, so they're scheduling repairs from 8 a.m. So the call handling is 24 hours. It goes to an out of hours call handling service, but they're scheduling repairs from 8 a.m. So sorry if that wasn't clear. Abandoned calls, that's abandoned calls after 5 minutes. Is a statistic that we refer to, and at the moment, as I said, when in the summary, 95% of calls are being handled.
Thank you. I have questions on this side of the room now. Firstly from Councillor Hargrove, then Councillor Hicks, and then Councillor Mwanganje.
My concern was a lot about multiple repairs failure, but I realise we're not dealing with that. So got a very simple question for you, and that is, are the contact centre staff still working from home?
Sorry, I think it's Councillor next.
Sorry, yeah.
Thank you. It's been very helpful and interesting. Thank you for your overview. I've done some cursory sums, so forgive me if my maths is wrong, but it looks like repeat callers is about 40% of our calls, which is a shocking stat in terms of failure demand. So I'm interested to understand, do we understand what the repeat calls are about? Do we have any insight into that? And do we track that and feed that back into the back office repairs service to improve service? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your presentation. My question is around practical measures that we can take to actually make the services better. I understand that feasibility studies are important, but can you explain the level of success that you've received from doing those feasibility studies, like an example that's come out of the research that you've conducted that has actually practically worked? And I've always wanted to ask this question: have you ever considered the design thinking process as opposed to feasibility studies? Because it shows that design thinking processes actually give you a practical way of doing the research and actually having an outcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for all of those questions. In terms of the first question around homeworking, the vast majority of staff are still homeworking. The council's plan is from the 1st of August, 50% of their previous working hours, people will be returning to the office with effect from the 1st of August. So our aim is, and what we've been working towards is the same for the contact centre. We'll bring people in on shifts. There have been days when we've had teams in from the contact centre. So there are, it's gradually encouraging people back to the office and ensuring that we do that as safely as possible as well, where there's individual issues, so individual risk assessments for staff, etc. It's key. Addy, I know from a head of customer service perspective, is keen to have his complement of staff back in the office, because I think there's a number of areas that he wants to work on, not least in terms of behaviours and team building. And as a new head of service, he'd rather ensure that he has his staff in front of him. We have actually moved back. We've moved the contact centre into Tooley Street, so they're based here on the first floor from Queen's Road, because it was key to me that they needed, rather than actually being a satellite office, that they're in you know, in 162 Street, and that space now exists just upstairs. So I think that's key in terms of improving the contact centre. But yes, still a high majority of staff working from home, but that will be changing shortly. So second question, around 40% repeat callers. I agree, it's a high figure, and we are looking at individual reasons. So there's a lot of work looking at individual calls coming into the contact centre, right down to actually pulling the calls and listening to the calls. And there's a whole raft of reasons for repeat callers, not least there are people that are chasing repairs, obviously. So we're working closely with Christine and her team to ensure that we start to improve that figure going forward. It's a key stat for Addy to look at how we can best improve that. And it's a lot of work to get to that point, and it involves the whole team, not just the front office. So practical measures and feasibility study. So that's just a term that I've referred to in terms of looking at different approaches to operational management. Fortunately, Addy comes with years of experience of managing large-scale, complex contact centres, and he's operated across many of those centres, different approaches to operational management. So he undertook a similar exercise in Enfield Council. So I'm clear that he has the knowledge, capability and experience to ensure that we get the best result for Southwark. In terms of different approaches to design thinking, processes, open to all ideas around how we can best approach different ways of thinking and different approaches to the future operational management of that. What I don't want to do is put something in place without going through a very robust process of testing and checking. And it's not, you know, it's about people, process, technology. It's about ensuring that we improve all of those things. To enable the customer, the resident experience to change. So it's a number of things that need to form a much broader repairs improvement plan.
Just on that comment about making sure that you test it out, check out the design theory process, because that's essentially what it's supposed to do. It takes an element of a bigger problem. Say, for example, you've got loads of calls coming in that are repeat calls. You take the repeat calls as an example. You basically carry out a process and test it out and test it out and test it out until it actually works. But in that sense, you're having an actual practical, you're having a practical experience as opposed to just research. But essentially, it will do exactly what you would want it to do, but just a consideration.
Thank you.
Yeah,
very helpful. Will do.
I have two more hands already. So Councillor Salmon and then Councillor Hicks. There aren't any others after that. I suppose we wrap this item up. I think there is a third. Yes. Oh, okay. Oh, yes, of course. Councillor Salmon.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation, Dominic. With reference to those who are working from home, on a few occasions that I had to ring, there was a beautiful silence. And I'm sitting there going, hello? Hello? And I get the response, my internet is really slow and it's still loading. If anybody's going to work from home, can we make sure they've got the right capacity? Because the silence was really disconcerting. It wasn't even music, it was just complete silence. And then it would be, my internet's, I'm sorry, and at one point a conversation I had to stop completely because the operative couldn't, and was apologetic and everything, but couldn't do anything for me. And I thought, well, if everybody's working from home, me ringing again isn't going to help, because I don't know. But can we always make sure, I'm happy for people to work from home, it's entirely your decision, but can we always make sure that everybody's got the right level of capacity to load up whatever it is they have to load up to enter any information? The other thing is, it still feels like when you're a leaseholder that you're sent to a different place to report. I think it's called homeowners or something. It comes as one of the options to ring, and it doesn't matter what you do, the same thing still happens. And again, the operatives have been very good. Like Chris, I've had good experiences, but I go through to that one, I explain there's a leak, and they go, "You're a leaseholder." Well done. I've been a leaseholder for 22 years. I know what I can and can't report. And I thought we'd moved past this, but I still think there's a problem with whoever's sitting on that particular phone number, knowing maybe how to deal with customers. Talk it through first before you tell me you can't do it, and explain very clearly why you can't do it. Because there is nothing worse than just being told, I said that there was a leak just outside my front door. And the lady on the end of the phone this time was disinterested in me, but I had gone through to the right, sent someone to the main tank. So a day later, I'm ringing back to say, "Hello, is anyone coming out?" I'm sitting in my flat at midnight, because of course they can come at any time completely. And they went, "Yes, we went to the tank. There's nothing wrong with the tank." No, I never said there was anything wrong with the tank. Can we re-educate those who are going to sit on the homeowners, leaseholder side? Because we're still getting that, problem with that. And I think that's because you said 50% are going to return from working from home. I wondered how many were working from home, but those are my two at the moment. Thank you. Oh.
Thank you. Just a couple of follow-ups. So around the rolling out of the new operational model, when that's sort of worked through, a model office approach might be worth considering as well. So having one team that tests something before rolling out more widely, which I've seen work elsewhere. And then a question was just regarding one of the paragraphs in the presentation, which talks about a gradual transition from its current call centre outlook towards a modern omni-channel model, etc. I wonder if you could just talk a little bit more about that, because omni-channel suggests to me we're going to be looking at digital and web chat and a few other channels. So just be interested to understand a bit more about that. Thank you.
And in a next, please.
Thank you. As I understand, you mentioned that there are 270,000 calls per annum. I want to be corrected if Southwark has 66,000 households. Is it right? Someone would help me if it's 66,000, if I remember right.
Who's quickest on the Google?
Households. Because the ratio, if I'm right and not wrong, I want to be corrected. If we take in account the number of emails as well, is an incredible number of calls and emails per household. And I would like to understand why it's so high. Is it because originally they're not sorted out, so they're a sort of repeat interaction? Because Southwark has been reported as having the highest number of legal cases of disrepair, and it's everywhere in the news. So we have to address it to understand why those huge numbers of calls and emails on top of them. So it should have been reported the total number of contacts rather than only 270,000 calls. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. A number of points that I'll take away that have been raised. So I think that's really helpful. In terms of just on the coming back to the first point that you raised, so in terms of the site, so there's ensuring that the calls are handled via the appropriate technology is key. There's an adherence thing that we need to ensure that, I know they've been working hard to ensure that, that people don't forward calls to mobile phones, for instance, and ensure that we've got sufficient capacity via Wi-Fi. So there are a number of things that have resulted in that happening in the past. I think hopefully those have been addressed, but I will take that away, raise with Addy again. So from a leaseholder perspective, yes, it's ongoing in terms of quality assurance and ensuring that people are dealing with the calls appropriately. Again, I'll take that away and speak to Addy directly about the issues that you experience, because clearly it's not a customer experience that anybody should be experiencing. So apologies for that. Model office approach, thank you again. So I'll take that away. Certainly my intention is that we, as I said, that we pilot and we look at different ways of working without kind of going big bang. So it's we ensure that it works prior to transition to any different approach to ops modelling. That's key. And sorry, did you raise another point around omnichannel? Yeah, so omnichannel, it's very new to me, and Addy could speak a lot more eloquently about this than I can. So he has developed a presentation that he's about to present to the cabinet member, but it's very much about picking up on digital, the customer access strategy, the workforce, and equality and diversity as part of that as well. And I, at this stage, I've got limited knowledge myself, but I'm sure Addy would happily report back as and when we've briefed appropriately. So 55,000. So in terms of overall housing, so not including leaseholders of which, so in terms of the total amount, yeah, so total number of households, 55,000. So in terms of, yes, there are still significant volumes of calls coming through. I can't answer the specifics in relation to the repairs team and reviewing the reasons for the multiple repairs. Obviously, part of that comes down to proactive forward planning and ensuring that there's an ongoing maintenance, pre-planned maintenance program that exists that picks up on a number of those issues. Clearly, as I said through the presentation, a number of areas that we do get repeat repairs on. So heating, hot water, we've got district heating, and that comes down to our overall capital planned works as well, and how we approach ensuring that we've got council properties and leasehold properties where there's communal facilities that are fit for the future. That you know, I would urge somebody from the repairs team to give you a fuller answer on that, because it comes down to a lot of the work that asset management undertakes and the major works.
How many number of households and getting several different figures, which is helpful. I did have one further follow up from Councillor Hargrove and another one from Councillor Mwanganji.
Thank you. This is a question about structure. You said you've been doing this since January 2020, and you're head of Exchequer. And I was always assumed that the call centre, the repairs call centre, and the other call centre comes under housing and modernisation. So I was just trying to understand a bit how the management line works here, because yeah, does Addy report to you directly?
So in response to your question, interesting scenario currently. So I brought into lead on the improvement work within the contact centre. So I've temporarily got responsibility for the contact centre. I've got dual reporting lines. So I report into the Strategic Director of Housing Modernisation for the contact centre, and Addy falls under my direct line management. And you know, it's clear for me we've got some more. It's January 21 that I took responsibility for it.
Oh, sorry.
We've still got some work to do to get to a place where I'm comfortable in terms of ongoing operational delivery for the contact centre.
Okay, thanks. That answers the question. Thank you.
Mine was just to ask about the presentation that Addy is going to be given to Cabinet. Are we going to be able to get that? Are we?
So he's briefing the cabinet member specifically on omnichannel. So it's entirely up to this commission if you'd like to see a further, if you'd like to call us back to give a further updates on improvement work, maybe later in the year, or specifically about omnichannel and some of the ongoing improvements that hopefully Addy will be able to come and speak to some of the detail as well.
Thank you. That does actually bring me on to what I was going to say next, which is that I think in summary, everybody is extremely invested, not only in the contact centre, but in the whole programme of the service, of the repairs service. And I suppose it's a question to throw back to you, really. What I don't want, what we could do is invite you to every meeting and ask the same questions and probably get similar answers around things being hopefully on the up. when is the most sensible time from your point of view for us to invite you back for an update on some of those key points where we're looking to see significant improvements and changes?
So from my perspective, I'd say give me 6 months to bed in some of the changes in terms of the restructure. Addy's been here since December. He's already made significant change. You know, we've got some way to go. So I'd rather give him some further time prior to inviting him back to this meeting, if that's acceptable and agreeable to all of you here.
So lightning speed maths tells me that we're looking at the first meeting of 2023 then, which remind me is February. Is that likely to be helpful for your purposes?
That'd be very helpful.
I think it will certainly be helpful for ours. Okay, just looking for any last minute questions, but I think we might be able to release you, Dominic. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. Yeah, have a good evening.
And thank you for your report in advance, which is always very helpful indeed. That brings us on to our last item on our agenda, which is to discuss the work programme for the rest of the year, which I think in reality we already are. So just to emphasise, there are only 4 more meetings, which I know seems like not enough. It certainly does to me after the range and depth of the questions that we've had so far. But as I know you know, it is the purpose of this commission to come up with recommendations, meaningful recommendations that aren't so broad and lacking in detail because we haven't been able to get into the detail that we may as well not have bothered. And that's the risk that I'm cautious we hang back from. Some of the issues that I think have come up tonight and that have also come up in discussions that I've had with members lead me to suggest that there are essentially 3 big areas that this commission could look at. The advice I've had is that 3 is quite a lot, but doable. 2 might be better. And certainly no more than 2 or 3. The 3 that I've written down are, well, obviously repairs. It's a perennial. Just the range of the questions there and the things that the Commission's clearly interested in make me think it could be our one. It could be a single focus of this Commission. But given that we've promised Dominic to give him 6 months, we probably ought to look at something else in the interim. The second one I've noted down, which we haven't discussed tonight, but that has been raised with me by members, is the question of housing allocation, and specifically looking at both empty homes, empty council homes, and overcrowding, which should not be existing at the same time. So that is an item unto itself. And then the third one, reflecting that we do now have this dual remit, is to pick up some of those questions that we were asking Chief Inspector Boswell this evening. And I think that the theme for me was about trust and visibility of the police, particularly in the wake of the pandemic. So those are 3 quite big headings. I would be really interested to hear views from members of the Commission as to which of those we should focus on, any additional ones you'd like to suggest, and how many is realistic in the time that we have. Councillor Hargrove.
Yeah, for me, tonight we focused on the call centre, but I think there's a whole other area of repairs, which is something separate but interlinked, you know. And for me, that's as a ward councillor, I think the repairs situation is as bad as I've known it for quite some time, in my view, from what I'm getting back. And as a ward councillor, it's something that I would really be very keen that the committee could focus on.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, sorry. Are you able to say what it is that you would have on an agenda? Because we've had a commitment from Dominic that he'll report back on those items.
I'm very happy for Dominic to come back in 6 months. I think that's really important. But it is different. And my experience as a ward councillor is that there's far too many of these kind of cases that Chris described. And I really think we need to get under that. They're totally unacceptable situations. And it's usually very, very vulnerable people who keep getting these repeat calls and people not being able to carry out the repair, and then it's getting back in the system and the churn. And those situations are very, very worrying for me because I didn't used to hear as many of those.
And is it specifically about repeat calls? Because I think that could be a useful way of getting into
I think it could be multiple repair failure.
Okay.
Is my concern.
Multiple, yes, sorry, not calls, I'm still
multiple failure.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Councillor Hicks?
Thank you. I agree. I think for me, it's something around the timeliness and the quality of repairs and the failure element. So I know, you know, we won't get into the call centre piece again, but I'd be interested to understand from the insight on the failure repeat calls that we're getting, what does that tell us about the back office, you know, the housing repairs service? Because that feels like a bit of a blind spot. And I'd love to get some reassurance that we are understanding what the problems are on the front end and using that to improve the service on the back end.
Thank you. Yes, Chris, and then Bathy.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be really remiss of me as a non-voting member from Tenants Council to flag up that you've got here under agenda items, quality of consultation with residents. And as far as we're concerned, it's the lowest it has ever been. And I think it's a crucial matter that needs to be scrutinised. On the agenda items, you've put as a comment to receive a comprehensive report from officers on the overall impact. That needs to also include a comprehensive report from the residents who are just not receiving the service at all. I think that's a crucial.
I think mine is a bit related to Chris's, but I think I just wanted us to focus, if there is time, we can look at residents' involvement as a whole.
Sorry.
Because it's something that we could miss opportunities to improve relationship and service in those areas. So I think it might look a small piece of task that is not important, but it can be very important in the grand scheme of things. So I think if we have, if there's any room that we can look into that, I think that would be very helpful.
I think we're saying the same thing, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I wonder, yeah, I'll come to Councillor Tester in a minute. I wonder if actually, bearing in mind the clear appetite there is to look quite forensically at repairs, we can actually marry the points that you're making with that item by suggesting that what we have at a future agenda is not just a report from the relevant officers, but inviting residents to come and talk to us about some of these repeat failure cases.
So that isn't the point we're trying to make at all. We're talking about the consultation process that was totally decimated by the council.
Which process is it that you mean then, Chris?
The resident involvement processes, the tenants council, the area forums, the whole process. But a really good example was, had no idea that the call centre now works from Tooley Street. Yeah, that is something tenants should have been advised of. And that would have been a subject for discussion.
Okay, I've understood the point. I will just say again, we will not be able to do everything if we're going to make this a meaningful
but this is
exercise.
I'm sorry, I have to do my job.
Yeah, I understand.
It is absolutely crucial because you will not take residents on board if you don't look at the way you're dealing with us.
No, I understand. And the other point that Amit has made is that community engagement, which was previously the remit of this commission, has now moved over to the Environment Commission. So one thing that we certainly can do is take that point and make it there. Well, the remit of this commission remains housing and is now community safety. I'm just going to take some other. Yes. Yes. Is under environment. Yes. And community engagement around. Well, let's take that away. Yeah, let's take that away. Yeah. I'm mindful of time and I want to take contributions from others about what the work programme for this commission would be, but no, of course, I understand. You did say. Any further? Yes, Councillor Tester, sorry.
No worries. I'm obviously kind of conscious that we can't do everything, but one kind of glaring hole to me is new homes and sort of the new homes programme. And I think there should be, I kind of do appreciate that we don't want to try and cover everything and not go really in depth on some things, but I think we probably should cover something in relation to that.
That's a good reminder, because that was the main focus of the predecessor commission last year. So although I'm not sure that it is a good use of time to go over it all again so quickly, I certainly think we can invite a progress report on the recommendations that have been agreed. In terms of the timing around that, and I am looking to my left, is that something that is most usefully done through our interview with the cabinet member, or would we look to do that at a later stage of the year?
Can add it to the same.
We could add it to the interview. So would that meet the?
Yeah, that sounds great.
Okay, great. Okay, yes, Councillor Salmon.
Thank you, Chair. I know it's a bit hard, but if there is a chance that we could maybe add another meeting in, if it becomes necessary, I worry that with the repairs one in particular, it's such a huge, I mean, which repair do you talk about? The leak from above, the communal heating, you know, we'll go off at many tangents. And I'm just wondering if we could break that one down a little, maybe spread it out over a couple.
Yes.
At the very least, a couple of meetings, if at all humanly possible.
Oh, I
understand
entirely agree with that. I don't think it's one meeting.
No.
And Amit will be my witness. I did say I suspected that following this meeting we would find there was quite a bit more that we wanted to look into around repairs.
If it's possible.
You know.
On the sorry, I know this. This is what happens. Because we talk so much about the repairs, if we look on this with the risk of the call centers and the emails and the things and the call center is only the symptom of actually the reality is. So technically we have to change the angle and look from the housing department and from the housing and strategy department, because if the contractors are not properly controlled, and this is a main issue, the call center in itself is irrelevant because they don't do anything else that in despair try to fix something which is out of their hands.
It wasn't my suggestion that we only focus on the contact centre. That was the entry point for today's meeting. But my suggestion is we sort of use it to.
The real cause is a lack of control of the contractors. And they are left on their devices, there are no checks. And the issue which I raised in the past, even that in the contracts, in all repairs and major work contracts, there are penalty clauses. They have not been applied for years. Actually, they have never been applied. And I ask this question, and probably we should reiterate the question. Why, given that in all the contracts there are penalty clauses for non-delivery that works to a certain qualities are not applied? Because they are not applied for years, then the contractors working with Southwark, they know that they could get away with anything. Just food for your thought. I'm a little bit over, but just food for your thought.
And no, that's all really, really useful. And again, I think there are questions there that the cabinet member would be in a good position to answer. So I think the clear appetite is that we have another item on repairs at the next meeting, which is in October. So that is some way away anyway. I believe that is the meeting which we're already planning to hear from Councillor Merrill. Is that right? So that's the October meeting. Yep.
Yes, that is.
That's the 3rd of October for those who don't yet have it in their diaries. So actually that sort of almost does double up as a further repairs item, but there will be other questions I'm sure that we all have for him. The other items mentioned were around empty homes and overcrowding. I saw some nods, but I haven't heard anyone's comments on that, and on the question of trust and visibility of policing. I do think it's very important that we give equal treatment to the housing and the community safety elements, given that both are in our remit. Any further thoughts on those two? Councillor Hicks.
I would absolutely support us looking at empty homes. It's something that comes up quite a lot. Residents talk about, particularly in the context of our very ambitious home building programme. What are we doing on the other side in terms of empty homes? I'd be supportive of that. I'm thoughtful about allocations and empty homes could be quite a big topic.
Yeah.
If they're combined. So I'd be in favour of maybe having, you know, some of the statistics on allocations and overcrowding to maybe support a conversation, then largely focused on empty homes and strategy around that.
Yeah.
Just
Okay.
support.
Yes. Okay. How do people feel about that suggestion? Any? Okay. So what if for the agenda for the next meeting, we will have our interview with Councillor Merrill, but we also have a dedicated item around empty homes and a report in advance that looks at allocations more generally. That sounds like a good meaty agenda to me. Are people happy to go ahead on that basis? Well, I think we'll use the interview with Darren as our next opportunity to talk about repairs. But I think the point, well, having said I didn't want to put the same items on the agenda every time, I think what I'm open to, what I'm suggesting is that we actually revisit repairs on most, if not all of our agendas, because I think the point is from every angle we look at, we see something where we actually feel like we need to delve a bit deeper. What I'd like to do is to get to the end of the year feeling as though we've done something really thorough and forensic, and that we haven't limited ourselves by only looking at it from this angle or only looking at it from that angle.
I think it would be useful if we were able to submit examples of our own casework and share them with each other, maybe to, you know, just to inform us what we're actually looking at.
And maybe to Darren, to Councillor Merrill for the purposes of his interview, or would you rather do that after we speak to him, after we interview him?
Yeah, I'd rather, instead of just in this kind of short period where he's getting a lot of different stuff at him, I'd rather that was a bit more worked up and a bit more deliberate myself. Because, you know, I think we should be trying to ask him about a range of stuff
agreed.
across his.
Agreed. So we'll interview Darren in October, and then we'll talk again at that meeting about what we want to do in November, and maybe we'll have a sense then of what is the more worked up next stage from that.
Okay.
Does that seem like a good approach? It's a sort of iterative approach to our work program, which does seem to make sense given the high proportion of new councillors, and frankly the fact that I just feel like the issues change at lightning speed, given everything we're dealing with as a society at the moment. Councillor Mwangaji.
Can I just get a recap of how this is all going to work?
Yes. So for the 3rd of October meeting, we're going to interview the cabinet member, and as part of that, there will be a specific focus around repairs. But it won't be the only subject that he's there to answer, I'm sure, unless people wish it to be. It's entirely up to members what questions we ask. And we will also have an item on there that's going to be primarily about empty homes, but we'd like to ask for a report in advance that covers allocations more generally, so that we do see some of the figures around overcrowding. I think that's what people are keen to do. And yes.
For the interview with the cabinet member repairs, is it possible to have one or two case studies of one repairs that went very well, and on the other hand, the ones that didn't go very well?
Do you mean from us or from him?
We can get that either from him submitted, so that we can look at that, and then based on that, we can come to the meeting with our questions, and because I think it would be good to have a case study.
Yes.
Thank you, Chair. If we're going to do that, we would need specifics so that the officers can pull out that information and look into what happened on those calls. But that confidentiality of the data might be an issue, but I can certainly look into that and come back to you.
Could we'll ask him and the team to provide us with a couple of case studies, because then they can do that at their end. So I think the suggestion was that we have a sort of good and a bad. I think the bad should still be about what the council intends to do about it, rather than just tell us how badly it went. How improvements have been made in the wake of that. Yes, Councillor Salmon.
I worry that when we do something like a bit of casework, we get bogged down in it, and we won't go to the bigger picture. We know that work is done well. We know that because that's the bit you don't hear about. But the concern here is what is going wrong and why it's going wrong. So I do understand what you're saying. There's a positive, there's got to be a positive and a negative, but we've got a very short time to have Darren there. And I just think it should be a little bit more, because you wax lyrical for 5 minutes all about how this went really well.
Good point.
And that one went very badly, but we're talking about hundreds going badly.
Let's ask for a case study of a piece of case, a case study around perhaps a multiple failure, as to use the term that was used earlier, from which the council made system-wide changes. That's an example of the sort of approach that we want to see. I hope this is too much to be asking Darren, but he's the cabinet member. And then further items that we're going to talk about to continue the recap are that in November, so in the October meeting, as we are doing now, at the end of the meeting, we'll discuss the work programme. And I think by then we will know what we want to do next on repairs. I think repairs is sounding like it's everybody's point of consensus. So Councillor Hargrove talked about something more worked up. I think by then we'll know what we want, who we want to speak to, and exactly what we want the focus to be. So that can be at the November meeting, and again, if we wish, at the February meeting, and then the April meeting is obviously the one at which we need to try to finalise our recommendations. We will also need to interview the borough commander and the fire commander. That's in our remit now, so we will need to find time on the November and February agendas, I suggest, to do that. And the questions about trust and visibility, again, we can ask those through those interviews, or it may be that we discuss it again and we decide we would actually like to have a more substantive item again on policing. Although I must just say, for the record, I found Chief Inspector Boswell's answers really illuminating around some of those issues. Is everyone happy with the proposal as it stands?
Yes.
Excellent. Amit, are you happy with the proposal as it stands?
Yeah.
Excellent, that's good news. In which case, I think I can formally bring the meeting to an end. I'd like to thank you. Oh, I'm so sorry, you're quite right in a yes. Discussion of any other items? Are there any? Yes. Any other open items as notified at the start of the meeting when we confirmed that there weren't any? No, that's all right. It was
a point to raise it.
Okay.
A point of order I want to raise to you as a scrutiny commission. I touched it in the beginning of in the opening of the session, but it wasn't part of the agenda, so I have to bring it to the end. What credibility do you think that this scrutiny committee could command, given the fact that a member on this commission has misrepresented itself and misled the residents, and it's widely known in all the press, which is Leo Polak. So I want you to take it into consideration, all the information which is available in press and available everyone in public domain. Given that it's a scrutiny commission and it interacts with people, we have to.
I'm sorry, and I'm going to say that's a point to take offline. It's not a point of order within the scrutiny remit of this commission. Just to clarify, Councillor Pollock is a reserve on this commission. He's not a member, and those considerations were, of course, part of the decision that he made to resign as a cabinet member. He has been re-elected as a councillor by the people of South Bermondsey. And there is no reason why he's not able to serve as a reserve member. However, if you wish to make your objections to the whip of the Labour group, whose name I provided you with, you're free to do that, but we won't be discussing it as part of this meeting. That's not appropriate. On that note, thank you everybody for your contributions today.
Thank you,
I'll
Chair.
call the meeting to a close. Thank you.